Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.
Hello everybody, this is Paul Neeson with the Raw Life Health Show, and today we're really excited. We're in Northern California. We got a very special guest, Dr. Alan Goldhamer, and he has a fasting retreat here, and a lot of my viewers always ask me about fasting, and here's the fasting man. Hello, Dr. Alan, how you doing?
Doing real well.
Good. Why don't you tell everyone about this fasting retreat you have going on, and all about fasting?
Well, for the last 25 years, the True North Health Center here in Northern California has been working with a premise that health is the result of healthful living. So we try to teach people how to live in such a way so that the body can heal itself. And one of the tools that we use to give the body a chance to get caught up is therapeutic fasting. So water-only fasting turns out to be an effective way of giving the body a chance to mobilize and eliminate those accumulated materials that build up in areas that they're not supposed to be, particularly within the cells and within the body. So we use fasting to give the body a chance to reduce the load of those intermediary products, and then we teach people how to eat, exercise, and sleep appropriately so the body heals itself.
And what's the average length of a program here, or is it different based on the individual?
We have people here for as little as a week, for as long as a year. It depends on what their condition is and what they're attempting to try to accomplish.
But people aren't fasting for a year, are they?
No, fasts range from 5 to 40 days typically.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. And for people out there that are wondering about fasting, what kind of diseases or illnesses or things can people overcome by strengthening the body through fasting?
Well, the fasting, it can be a useful tool in a wide variety of conditions. As far as original research that we've published, if you go on our website at healthpromoting.com, you can download articles that we've published in peer-reviewed index journals, including the medically supervised water-only fasting and the treatment of hypertension. We have 2 papers in dealing with high blood pressure, and if you look at our data, you'll see that we have the largest effect sizes that have ever been published in treating high blood pressure in humans. In our first study, we took 174 consecutive patients with high blood pressure, and 174 people were able to achieve blood pressures low enough to eliminate the need for medication. Our average effect size in treating high blood pressure with fasting was over 60 points. So very powerful and very consistent effects in helping people with high blood pressure overcome this problem. We also treat a lot of people with type 2 diabetes. And this condition also very consistently responds as we reduce insulin resistance with fasting and then apply a health-promoting diet and exercise program. A significant percentage of these patients can stabilize without the use of medication.
Wow, people with diabetes usually think they need to eat more and keep eating.
Well, they need to eat healthfully and they have to live healthily like any condition. We also treat a lot of patients with autoimmune diseases, particularly systemic lupus erythematosus, rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis, psoriasis, eczema, asthma, these kinds of conditions where the body begins reacting to its own tissues. And often these conditions also respond very favorably to a period of fasting followed by a health-promoting diet and lifestyle regime.
Sure. I don't know if you know my story, but I had ulcerative colitis, and I actually stopped eating, and that's when I saw some improvement.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of confusion here in the real world between real fasting, which is water fasting, abstaining from food and drinking water, and I advise doing it supervised, and your place is a great place to do that. And juice fasting, a lot of people refer to that, but it's actually an oxymoron to say juice fasting. That's pretty more a liquid diet, right?
Clearly, a juice fast is a feeding program. It's a high sugar feeding program without any fiber. We do some juice diets here. We certainly do carefully controlled feeding programs. But when we talk about fasting, it's a rather unique situation. Fasting is a biological adaptation, and it is the process whereby the body converts to utilizing its own resources. And in this adaptive mode, there's a number of mechanisms that kick in that really are unique to water-only fasting. It's not always a pleasant experience, but it can be highly effective. And when water fasting is needed, there's nothing else that works quite as well as water fasting. Having said that, water fasting is not for everybody. And so there are many patients that are not good candidates for the use of water fasting because it's a little bit too vigorous. So we'll either use juice diets or we'll do healthy eating programs and just be a little more patient in helping them recover their health.
And before somebody signs up for your program, do you have to get that?
No.
Before somebody signs up for your program, do you review them to see if they're a good candidate for it?
Well, the first thing we do is we have people go onto our website at healthpromoting.com and we have them fill out what we call the admission forms. And that gets us the information relevant to their medical history. Then we go through and do a phone interview where we explore the information that we've collected a little bit more deeply, as well as getting relevant previous medical records and laboratory tests. Once the patient arrives at the True North Health Center, our medical director, Peter Sultana, will go through a full medical history exam and we'll review laboratory data and come up with a game plan that makes sense for them. And if fasting is a part of that, we'll undergo that fasting here in a controlled, medically supervised setting. Patients are seen twice a day. We have an extensive educational program that they go through. And then afterwards, we introduce healthy eating regimes as well as exercise and appropriate activity. So it's a comprehensive, contained environment which allows us to do this very intensive process of fasting safely and effectively. And the focus being on, once you get people well, teaching them what they need to do so they can stay well and ultimately get a good long-term outcome.
Wonderful. Okay, 2 more questions. First question is, what's the best way to break a fast, in your opinion?
Well, there's some individual variation with that, but typically what we do is we do a day of fresh, raw fruits and vegetable juices for each week to 10 days of fasting on water, and a day of raw fruit and vegetable only for each week to 10 days of fasting. So, for example, a person that fasts, say, for 3 weeks may have a couple days of juice, a couple days of raw food only, and then we'll very gradually reintroduce the more concentrated foods that are appropriate for that individual into the diet.
Okay, and during a fast, do you recommend people to rest as much as possible, or do you recommend people be up and moving around? Or?
Well, we do think that rest is important in fasting to a certain degree. Even moderate activity will double caloric utilization and nutrient reserve. So fasting needs to be done in a controlled and resting state. However, you don't want absolute bed rest because you can get the pathology of bed rest, and that can be detrimental. So what we do here is we have twice daily educational programs where people can come down. They have lectures, we have classes that are done in a group setting. We see each patient morning and night by one of our staff doctors to make sure that everything's going the way that it should, and we're available 24/7 to deal with any issues that come up.
Okay. And people fasting long term, this is a great place. But short term fast, some people recommend fasting like 1 day a week. Do you recommend that or not necessarily?
Well, I wouldn't arbitrarily choose not to eat 1 day a week unless there's some indication, because it actually takes the body several days to adapt to the fasting process. So just to arbitrarily say, well, Mondays I'm not going to eat, hardly is physiological, and I think it would be of limited benefit in terms of any substantive detox effect. Fasting 1 day a week for 5 weeks is not the same as a 5-day fast. It's not even in the same ballpark. So the idea is to fast as infrequently as necessary, as short as possible, but however long it takes to get to the body to the point where when you eat well, then you can continue to get healthier faster than you get sick. And as long as people are healing faster than they're getting well, then you get a good outcome.
Sure. Is there anyone that should definitely not fast, or even if they're thinking of it?
Yeah, there's tremendous variety of people that should fast. The biggest probably contraindication of fasting is the fear of fasting. People that don't understand fasting and don't understand the nature of the healing crisis would become potentially distressed by fasting, and that's probably not a good thing. People that have certain types of pathology, certain forms of cancer, kidney disease, that limits their ability to fast, type 1 diabetes, there's all kinds of relative contraindications to fasting, not the least of which could be pregnancy. So it doesn't mean that any of those conditions are absolute contraindications, but you'd certainly want to be very cautious about introducing something like fasting in a place where it would be potentially not as helpful.
And I know most natural hygiene places that work up those principles do not believe in this, but some places do. During fasting, do you recommend anyone, or at any time, do you ever recommend colonics or enemas, or do you always
we try to avoid the use of colonics and enemas whenever possible. We do have a colon hydrotherapist affiliated with our facility that we'll refer to if it's necessary, and once every year or two, a person will come along with a clinical presentation that would justify the consideration of a colonic or enema. Usually it's because the proper pre-fasting lead-in diet has not been followed, and so they'll end up with some bowel impaction, and an enema or colonic may be necessary to deal with that mechanical obstruction. There are certain conditions where you may also be able to justify an initial pre-fasting enema or colonic to try to minimize the likelihood of post-fasting bowel obstruction or impaction, but I'd have to say that it's quite rare. If we do a good job before the fast, we do a good job of the fast, and a good job after the fast, we can really minimize the likelihood of the problems that would warrant this type of bowel intervention.
Do you ever recommend herbal colon cleanses, or?
I don't. I don't. I really don't really have a need to, because the fact is when people follow the diet recommendations that we make, the bowels begin to work properly.
Nature's wealth, good for your health. This is the Raw Life Health Show.